All right, thanks for having me. We have the 3 o'clock slot, so we're going to jump right into it. This seminar is going to be help you through one of those crises. If you ever find you're in that meeting where everyone's kind of looking down, and then you walk in, and then the leader of the meeting goes, well, we've all been waiting for you, and the board wants us to really focus on culture, so we need to know what your plan is for culture. So what are you going to say? Do you have that already planned together so that you can present to them and inspire them, not just make excuses for when you're going to come up with your plan? So we're going to help you come up with a plan for culture for your organization in this presentation. So I've been driven by this research question in my career. What is the one thing that motivates all people? I thought if we could answer this, we can make culture around that. So I've been endeavoring to do that. Whenever I go and speak all over the nation, I ask people, what do you think this is? And so what's one of the things that motivates somebody to come to work? Money. Let's see. Survey said money. Yes. What else do you think motivates people to work? People. So that would be like enjoyment, get a job that you like. You'll never work a day in your life. What else? What else is something people really had to think more? What would they say? What's that?
Personal fulfillment.
Fulfillment, purpose. So these are kind of the big topic categories that I get when we go. And Dan didn't tell you that I actually do experiments on the people I talk to. So you're going to be my guinea pigs for the next hour. So he actually gave me a pretty generous stipend to motivate you guys to do this. So what we're going to do is you're going to work at this Pumps Are Us place. So everybody needs to start pumping because it's 3 o'clock. So everybody's doing it. So you need to. No, seriously, everyone needs to pump your work. And I'm going to give you a salary. And when you see a salary that you like, you can keep pumping. This is for an annual. Hey, you're not pumping in the back there. You're not getting paid. Okay, so if you'll do this for the next year for $6 million, keep pumping. Good? Good? Okay, what about $600,000? We still got pumpers? Oh, yeah. All right, $60,000? This is where I start losing most professionals. And then $6,000? Not so much. So here's the deal. Pay is relative to fairness. Like LeBron James, would he do this for a year for $6 million? No, he makes that in like a game, doesn't he? Or a hedge fund manager, he might make $600,000 to $100,000 in a month. He wouldn't do that. But most people in Missouri, $60,000 is like, well, my blue collar workers, they do it for $60,000. But most of us would stop there, and $6,000 is like, no way, we're not going to do it for that. But some third world countries, that might be 10%. That might be 1,000 times what they make in a year. So in some places, that would be a fair salary, beyond fair. So it's all relative. Once pay becomes fair, it's no longer a motivator. Okay? So money is not really the core of the issue I found. So what about this? Enjoying work. He's got a great haircut, so that's something you must enjoy. This is Andre Agassi. And he gets to play a game for his job. Okay, he gets to swat a little ball back and forth with some other player and play a game. And when he shows up, what's your name?
Michael.
Michael's here. Everybody cheer for Michael. Yay! Can you imagine every time you come into work, you hear applause and people shout your name? Michael's here.
I do.
Yeah, you do? You must be really good at what you do. So, enjoyment. And he was number one in the U.S. Open, the French Open, the Australian Open, the Open. He won the Olympics. He was rising high, He made millions of dollars, and he said, let me let you into this little secret. He says, we didn't change nothing. He said, how could I have my own plane and a bank full of money and hate my job? And he ended up in a downward spiral after he realized that. He started cussing out the ref, throwing his racket. He ended up in amateur leagues. He ended up in methamphetamines, in despair, because enjoying your job just wasn't enough. So where do you go from there? And he was in despair. If that's not it, let's contemplate purpose. Now, Megan was in an HBO special about her job, pretty important. She was like a millennial, and she graduated, 2010-ish. She decided to go to New York City. That would be pretty cool. Get yourself in this big metropolitan area. And then she was working for a hedge fund manager and just like answering the phones. And she's like, this isn't really the big purpose for my life that I thought. But her roommate said, you know what? I saw this guy in the cafe and he was talking about purpose. And he's kind of like this artist guy. He's going to reshape the world of work. In fact, he's got this whole thing called WeWork, and he's going to create a place where people work to make a life, not just a living. You know, you see the creatives over here having coffee with the financiers and the tech people, and it's all, whether they're partying or whether they're having work, it's all integrated now. It's like real life social media being lived out. Going to change the world of work. You'll never work like your parents ever did again. Purpose. And people followed him. In fact, they had thousands. This is one of their corporate meetings. They were sitting in the mud in upstate New York in a kids' camp while he was like preaching to them about the world of purpose and how they were going to change the world at WeWork. They were drinking it in, and they were eager. They were signing up by the thousands to work for him. And VC money was coming in, and he was a darling until Megan, who was the CEO's personal assistant, started facing reality. The shouting, I could do my job, your job better than all of you. I should fire all of you. You're not working fast enough. Hustle harder. Where was the purpose then? Hustle harder was the real menu, the real motive. Late nights. Instead of it being like, oh, we're going to get this one thing done late night, it became every night, 11 o'clock, 12 o'clock, 1 in the morning. And they were all working for futures. You know, when the stock value finally gets sold, then they would cash in. But they were working for peanuts, doing this hard work. And then the firings began because they were losing money at something like $3,000 a minute. They were worth $49 billion at one point in time. And then the firings, and Megan was one of those fired, and the CEO left with millions. And she was left with despair, lost. In her HBO special, she said, for 2 years, I was lost because they gave me this purpose that I wanted so deeply, but it was so not there. And it took her 2 years in therapy just to untangle all of the things that were done to her in that workplace. And that leaves us with this current crisis. We just went through the 3 things that we were talking about: purpose, entertainment, enjoyment, and money. And if that's not it, what do we tell people? What do we tell the young people coming to our colleges? This is why you work. And the current crisis, according to Gallup, if work were a tug of war of 10 people, there'd be 3 polling in every organization. And then there'd be 5 who are only polling when you're looking. They're called disengaged workers. And then there's 2, this guy in the end, who's pulling against you, disgruntled. This is the average team. This is the average organization. The leaders all have good intentions, but this is the way the average lines up for Gallup. Probably in your organization too. So it's a challenge. You guys all want this to happen, but I as a leader, I want this to happen, but it's hard. These are the statistics. I'll highlight a few, like 1 day a week lost per employee in productivity. 1 day. Why is this important? That's pretty important. Turnover, quality, and then 75% of Gen Z quit for emotional issues. What have they been in the workforce for, like 6 weeks now? But maybe they haven't given up on the reality that we're not giving them. And maybe we should listen to them. So here's the deal. With this research question, I realized I was asking people's left brain their question. And they were calculating, yeah, I'd do it for that. Yeah, that would be enough. I could keep going for that. I'd keep doing it. But I realized if I asked your right brain a different question or a slightly different question, I could get the real answer. And I could get people to answer it quickly. So you ready? Here's the right brain question. I call it the eternity question. Dun, dun, dun. So here it is. If you could have just one thing to satisfy you for all eternity, what would you choose? So we're going to open up a sci-fi portal to eternity. You have to take one thing from this world into that, and that has to work forever. Forever. All right? So let's try it out with money. You could be on your phone all day long, Amazon packages to your heart's delight because you have all the money in the world. But that's all you get for eternity with that work. Enjoyment alone. You get to pick a game, something you love doing. But that's all you get to do for all eternity, that one activity over and over and over and over with that work. What about purpose? You get to paint the painting, write the symphony, make the nonprofit you've always wanted to do. But that's all you get to do for all eternity. Which would you choose? I give you number 4. You could be surrounded by those who care and value you for all eternity. What would you choose? 1, 2, 3, or 4? 4. How many chose 4? Everybody, who chose 4? If you chose 4, look around. This is the one thing. 99% of the people that I survey choose number 4. You just discovered something in 10 minutes that unifies us all. Every single person, from line workers with scraggly beards and tattoos to CEOs, to hospital doctors with PhDs, to rocket scientists, to HR directors. I've spoken to them all, and they all choose this. How long did it take you to choose that? This is for all eternity, and you chose it in 2 seconds. That's because the right brain knows. The right brain knows what it feels like to be valued and to be surrounded by people who value you. It's like, I could do that forever. That would work. That's not going to disappear. That's something. It unifies us all. It changes us. Valuing people ignites our bodies and our brains, and our right brain knows that. Our left brain would go, oh, maybe not that. Maybe not people. But this is the thing. It ignites our bodies and our brains. It changes us. It's scientific proof. I did my dissertation on this. It changes the molecular structure of your brain. The outcomes of every fiber of your body is changed when you feel valued by people. Totally changes you. It's the operating system of culture. So this is the one thing that we need to build culture around, is whether you feel valued and cared for within any social structure that you go into. So this is the critical foundation that we have. The problem I have is, in 15 minutes we've discovered that. However, why do we still have 70% of people going to work disengaged? That's a big problem. How come I can convince every worker that that's what I want, but that's not what they feel? There's a disconnect, and I call that commodity culture. People show up at work and they feel like a commodity. Well, we'll explore later another pathway called VP culture, okay? Valuing people culture, and we'll see how to create that. But let's explore the dark side first, okay? Commodity culture. It's based on behavioralism, okay? In the 1950s, when management science was starting, they decided behavioralism was the way to go. If we could do a little hoop and put a reward on the other side, you jump through it. It's called stimulus and response, okay? And it's geared towards goals and rewards. And here's the thing, it works. Wait, Randall, you said it didn't work. But it works temporarily. That's why none of you chose it for the eternity question. It works temporarily, okay? It needs increasing stimulus. If I give you this, you guys would still work for $6 million until you got there. And once you get there for a while, and you're LeBron James, it's like, no, not good enough anymore, okay? People are a commodity in this system. They treat themselves like commodities. They feel treated like a commodity. They feel like I'm selling my time for labor, for money, for whatever reward that you're giving, and it destroys the value of humanity. So when we create a culture where we're doing this to make that money so you can make that money, here's your slice. You're just a cog in the machine, and everybody feels that. When 70% of the people are feeling it, that is why we're in this place. And what's going on in your brain? Well, we're trying to work off of the dopamine molecule in our brains. And you hear about this all the time on the internet. Oh, you want more dopamine. Do we? Well, it's the desire molecule. Okay, so it's in your brain to get you to move towards something. This is exactly the molecule they're using in the behavioralist stimulus response model to get you to move towards goals and goods. Well, isn't that what we want at work? Yeah. But if that's the foundation of what we do, what happens to our brain? Well, we're working off of desire functions in the brain, not value functions in the brain. They're two separate systems. And here's the thing. The brain knows that if you get stuck in this, you could die. They put rats in isolation and make them press a lever for cocaine, and they'll sit there and do it until they die. And what do addicts do? They sit there and do it until they die. because it jams up your value system. Or in fact, it doesn't use your value. It uses your desire system so that you'll pursue it until you die. So when you jam it with something like cocaine that upregulates it so intensely that it actually changes the shape of your brain, people get stuck. When you use it as a management tool, you're going to create dysregulation, and people are going to get stuck. Okay, so the brain downregulates it. So everything every time you make a hoop, you have to give a bigger reward to get the same amount of dopamine. That's why they take more pills, not less, as addicts. So it's destructive in its long-term use. The brain downregulates it because it's so stimulating, it'll fry your brain. Less and less dopamine is released every single time. So Dr. Robert Lustig wrote this book called The Hacking of the American Mind. Okay? He said that we're hacking our minds because we don't have value. People are losing their sense of value, so what are we replacing it with? External sources of dopamine. He says we've used stuff to replace human value. We've hacked our food. Doritos are scientifically engineered to make you not stop eating them. Okay? The electronics. How long have you found yourself in the doom scroll and suddenly you wake up and you're like, what have I been doing for an hour? Designed to hack your dopamine. Entertainment. It used to take us 10 years to watch Friends, and now our kids can watch it in a weekend. Marketing. And then, unfortunately, leadership. Our leaders are using this because it works temporarily and they don't know any other way. What's worse, it leads to cortisol stress because there's not rewards enough to go around. And so everyone thinks, where's mine? Oh no! And you end up in this cycle where reward is limited. You're not valuable. I'm just stuff. I'm just a cog in this machine. And it ends up with 42.1% of all absences are due to mental health issues. And in fact, if that mentally ill person shows up at work, they're 1.5 times less productive than if they just went home and took a personal day. Okay, so this is a huge cause of stress and overload in our work when we treat people like commodities. Okay, now we look at the brain. Okay, we study some neuroscience here. According to Dr. Bruce Perry, this is your brain is very pointy. You didn't know this. But at the top here, you've got the cortex. That's where you do all your creativity, your thinking, your planning, and your ethics and values are all contained in the cortex. Okay? And then you've got your limbic system, and its job is to scan for danger. And then diencephalon, it's the router. It shifts the body into like, okay, send out the hormones, change the electrical system, start breathing, it gets the body ready to act, and then the brainstem just keeps you alive. And here's the key that Dr. Bruce Perry said. The brain is emotionally state dependent. When your brain feels something, it changes. It starts turning things on and off, and it goes, when I feel valued, my whole brain works. Everything. I can thrive. It says, we've got energy, we've got safety, let's go. Whole brain. When you start feeling these other things, alert, alarm, fear, terror, you start getting systems going offline. Limbic goes offline. Diencephalon goes on until you're just surviving. And then it does this to your intelligence. You're up there in the stratosphere with intelligence, and then it drops down to dingbat land. How many have experienced that under stress? You're just like, you can't remember phone numbers, you can't remember things. You just got a terrible email, and you're just sitting there shaking with adrenaline. We've all been there. And you can't think a thing. I just have to go home because I can't work anymore. That's the extreme terror that you could feel at times. That thing when your heart is beating and you've been through a conflict, you got one of those conflict emails that's, I have to go home. So that's what happens to our brains. And when we use the dopaminergic cycle and the cortisol cycle, it long-term pushes us down into this permanent state where our cultures and our people are feeling this chronic long-term state of stress and disengagement because the brain doesn't feel value. And you could tell just by looking at his face, because that's how we connect as human beings. We read faces. We're designed to get information from each other from our faces. And they don't feel value in the commodity culture. So let's go down the more hopeful path, the VP culture path, okay? The VP culture path is the valued people culture. It's what you guys are, usually the HR director, I'm preaching to the choir. Okay, this starts from a different scientific premise, attachment science. Dr. John Bowlby, if you guys heard of him, he's the one that started attachment science, again in the 50s in England. he noticed, he was a medical doctor, that when proper English parents would bring little Johnny into hospital, they call it hospital, not the hospital. So they bring little Johnny in, they would tell him to have a stiff upper lip, and they would be back in 3 weeks. And they'd leave him there. And then there was the odd English parents. They would bring little Ian in, and they would stay with him and have tea and play games, and well, they would never let Ian go. And Ian would get better in 2 days. Whereas the other one, Johnny, would languish. All of his immune system functions would be lower, his energy would be lower, he'd be lethargic, he wouldn't thrive, whereas the other child thrived. So he created this whole theory called attachment science. And it's been proven, and it's the psychological bedrock now of psychology. Behavioralism has taken a back seat to the core thing that motivates humanity. We now know it's about attachment, that we are wired for this. It's children through adulthood. The brain is tuned by valuing. It's not tuned by reward. We can get people to move. That's one segment of our brain, but the totality of your brain is really tuned to valuing, and that's the core. And leaders can create or diminish that value in a second. In a second. Okay? So, more brain science, okay? This is what happens to your brain. This was the core of my dissertation, serotonin. The unsung hero of the brain. You don't hear about this like on all the business pages. You need more serotonin. You do. It's released when we're feeling valued or we're valuing others. It's a virtuous cycle. If I'm giving it, I get it. If I receive it, I get it. And so does that person. It's a beautiful thing. It's a cycle that we have in our brains. I give and you give. It's like we could create more and more and more and more of this kind of energy all day long if we just knew this cycle existed. It's a little bit slower than dopamine. You don't get stuck in it like dopamine. You thrive under this. That's why you all chose this pathway. I could do that forever. Okay? It gives you a sense of contentment and safety. Those same rats that they put with the lever, when they put other rats in it, they stopped. They didn't need it anymore because they had social interaction with their other buddies. Okay? Gives you a sense of contentment and safety. The leaders are the best leaders, have the highest levels of serotonin. So what do? Because they're content and they're safe, what does that free them up to do? To be generous, to be affiliative. The leaders that are low in serotonin, those are the ones that we call tyrants. They're not leaders, they're takers. And so we confuse oftentimes, oh, we don't want leaders. You do want leaders. They're the generous, affiliative, great ones that make other people feel that generous cycle. That's what real leadership is. We don't put fake leaders up on pedestals. We put the people like Gandhi and MLK. Those are the people who did that. They embodied that, and that's why we follow them still. Serotonin on the brain, they did a longevity study. They did this longevity study in Harvard where they studied a cohort of men for 80 years. Longest study ever done in a psychology department. They didn't know. They were just trying to see what made people successful. And they found out that the people who had thriving relationships were the ones that were successful. They had better health, better families, better outcomes, better career, better finances, because they had people around them. Connected. Amazing. And here's what serotonin is really cool. It's connected throughout the entire brain. Most of these systems are limited to something minor. This goes throughout the entire brain and upregulates it. Dr. Paula Hart, PhD, calls it the master modulator, meaning it controls the other modulators. It's the conductor of the orchestra. It's the leadership molecule, like I mentioned. And not only that, but it goes through the GPC connector. Isn't that exciting? That means it goes into the nucleus of the neuron and upregulates and changes the way your DNA is expressed. It has a very long-term effect. That's why you chose it for all eternity, because it permanently can change your brain for long term. So just by being in here talking about value, studies show it'll affect you for 6 weeks. Amazing. And then it starts to release other things like oxytocin. Paul Zak, if you've followed his research, he's all about how oxytocin changes. It's the trust hormone. It gives us confidence so that I can engage in business, I can do life, I can do work. He says there's no shortcuts or substitutes. Success is great, but there's no amount of money or achievement or fame that will satisfy our need for human attachment. That's an economist. He's discovered this pathway. Very critical. It also releases endocannabinoids and endogenous opioids. It means you get free pot and heroin. That's why the little rat doesn't press it anymore, because it's already in the brain. Your body already releases it in healthy doses so that your pain threshold goes down and your euphoria goes up. Pretty cool. All because of serotonin. Oh, and then your vagus nerve gets activated. This is Stephen Porges. He's a world famous neuroscientist, okay, that clinicians love. And there's this major nerve called the vagus nerve that goes from your cranium down into your major organs, your heart, your lungs, nothing important, you know, and it tells them what to do, and more importantly, 80% of that signal goes back to the brain and says things are okay. So like when your heart is beating, when you get that cruddy email, it goes, uh-oh, things are bad down here. Things are really bad. The heart's going crazy. The lungs are going crazy. The stomach is shut off. That's what the vagus nerve does. But he doesn't call it the stomach, heart, lung circuit. What does he call it? The social connection circuit. Because it's engaged by our social connections. So much so that he calls it that. And it gets better. It connects with the nucleus ambiguous. And you're thinking, what does that mean, Randall? Remember the face? The nucleus ambiguous is in the back of the brainstem, and it connects to the cranial nerves of the face. So when your gut feeling is terror, you show terror. When your gut is feeling happy and pleasant, you show it on your face. So we're like networked human beings. I can't hide it. If I'm faking it like a 4-year-old trying to smile, you'll know. Okay? Did you know that a stroke victim they can't smile on one side until one of the cranial nerves actually activates it? Like a genuine smile, they smile on both sides because it's from a different part of the brain. Amazing. So this gives you a positive, energetic feeling. Your nervous system engages in this serotonergic pathway as well. So your whole body is wired for valuing. If you want to feel energetic and alive, this is the pathway. Dopamine, death. Lethargy, destruction. This, energy, life, connection, virtuous circle, serotonin upregulates and keeps you there for years, weeks, months. And you all knew that instinctively when I asked you in the beginning. Nobody went, I don't want that valuing stuff. You all said yes, because you knew that's the way the brain works. So we're going to give you some case studies now, okay? So we're going to talk about Southwest Airlines, because people always think, okay, great neuroscience, great psychological stuff, that all works just fine. But what happens in the real business world? So Southwest Airlines is a perfect example, okay? Southwest Airlines, they started behind the 8 ball in an industry that was already saturated, okay? So they had this highly saturated industry that they started behind the 8 ball with less money, and they had to fly point to point, which is 20% less efficient. They couldn't fly to like Chicago, switch planes, and then go on to the next destination, because the big guys wouldn't let them. So with all that, if you can see the picture, it's just a picture of a heart. You know those little hearts that they have on their planes? That's because they have a culture of valuing people. That was the only difference that they had as a corporate differentiator. Okay? So in 50 years, what's the difference that happened between Southwest and all the rest of the airlines? Well, what happened was this. In 50 years, they had 50 years of profitability. They had the lowest level of layoffs. They had the highest productivity. And you're thinking, well, maybe they're just not unionized. They had the highest level of unionization of any player in the industry. And you think 50 years of profitability, that's no big deal. It's a big airlines. The airline industry has posted a net loss in 50 years. Okay? So we've got 50 years of loss, 50 years of profitability. They're the largest airlines in the United States and have the most stock value, have the least amount of layers, and have the higher stock value than all the rest. And if you're thinking, well, maybe you're just cherry picking, Randall, okay? Let me read you this. You can barely read it from the back. It says, this is from Herb Kelleher, the former CEO during those 50 years. He says, for those who think that leading with love is simply soft management, review the record of Southwest Airlines over the last 50 years. From these results, it can be factually and logically concluded that you seek long and continued success for your business organization. Treat your people as family and lead with love. The CEO of Southwest Airlines. And in that time, there has been 77 bankruptcies during that time. So that's an incredible amount of narrow margins that people have. So if you're talking to those skeptical people, you're the HR people, you're the soft management people. No, this is hard business. Another great avenue to test for hard business is Cooper Medical Center. Cooper Medical Center is a medical center in New Jersey that's a $4 billion medical center. And they tested out this hypothesis of whether valuing people could actually be evidence-based medicine. Okay, so they tapped their chief scientist, Dr. Turetic, and he surveyed over 1,700 surveys over the past 17 years. Now, if you're a researcher, you know that that's the gold standard, the meta-study. Because, they could pay him to do an individual study, and what would he do? He'd do whatever he thought the CEO wanted him to prove, okay? This is a meta-study of all the other studies in the medical field, okay? And I'm going to rifle through. So you've got a meta-analysis, 62. I'm going to show you study after study, really quick, of what he found, some of it. 62% higher patient adherence to treatment. Reduction of pain after surgery. Reduction of hospitalization for 2 days post-hospital, heart attack. Level 1 trauma patients report better outcomes. Extends the life of cancer patients. Doubles improvement in chronic pain. Decreases intensity and length of migraine headaches. IBS relief doubled. Better patient and functional outcomes on both physical and cognitive functioning. Diabetes, 80% higher control of optimal blood sugar. 41% odds of serious chronic diabetic complications lowered. It reduces symptoms of the common cold. And you think, oh great, usually I get to this slide and leaders are like, more work, just what we needed in a field like the medical field that are already chronically overworked, and 50% are approaching burnout. The average doctor takes 11 seconds before they interrupt their patients. 11 seconds. You know how much longer it takes to show compassion? Any guesses? How much longer?
5 seconds.
29 seconds. It takes 40 seconds for them to go, wow, that really hurt. Can you pick up your grandchild? That must really, oh, wow. Is it like a 10 or an 8? The person feels felt, compassion happens, and like I said, there's that reciprocal benefit for the practitioners as well. They start to feel the results of giving serotonin and compassion as well as the practitioner. And it lowers, here's their conclusion, compassion has the power to improve patient and practitioner outcomes and financial outcomes. Because the healthcare industry, they have to study the patient, the practitioner, the outcomes, the finances, they study it all. So if you're going to look to an industry, look to the medical industry to find out what actually works. Because they study this, and valuing people does. And so I've got 7 minutes to tell you the thumbnail sketch of how do we create VP culture. You ready? So we're going to go really fast. Okay, first is you don't rise to the level of good intentions, you fall to the level of your skills. Okay, it's not about going away from here going, I really want to do that. You have to know exactly what to do from the scientific perspective. And here are the 3 areas of what I call scientific practices that you need. Personality science, emotional science, and value science. So as my experience as an organizational psychologist, these are the 3 gold standards. If you've got these, you're going to start valuing people. Let's look at personality science. Okay, the DNA of personality has been found, but do you guys know what it is? It consists of 5 words. Most leaders don't know. 5 words. It's one of the most neglected discoveries in all of psychology, but it is a law of psychology. Leaders don't know it, and it's also personality, according to studies, is the greatest source of conflict. There's more diversity in personality science than any other part of your organizational structure. So this is foundational, because you want everyone to be, our tendency is we want everyone to be like us. And there's this invisible thing called personality, and we don't know what it is, but we know that person doesn't have it, so they must be bad. We call it the fundamental attribution error. People who don't have our personalities, like even my wife, for 30 years until I did this science, she was wrong. I was right. She needed to become like me. And then I got this, and I'm like, she's now in the awesome category, and I'm trying to release her awesomeness, and she's trying to release mine. A big shift, because you can't change personality. Okay, you don't shift this. You release it. You find the awesomeness, because everybody has a key that you don't have. If you're good at something, somebody else has got the opposite. If you're good at something, you're bad at something, and the other person has, you're good. And when you show up as a leader and say, I'm weak in this, you're strong in this, let's work together, we'll be awesome. How's that coworker going to feel? Honest boss, honest team member, boom, you're going to start doing work together in a completely different way. It releases the awesome in people. So every child comes up with these 5 immutable factors that you cannot change. So stop trying to change them. Do not do a personnel review and say, your personality really needs to change on this factor. You could say, yeah, this is something that is a challenge for you, so let's try and use this strength that you have to overcome that. Because you're awesome at this. Let's release the awesome. This is all about that. And it does release the awesome. If you engage people with their personalities and lead them to their strengths, 70% more engaged. 70% more engaged. This is one of the critical foundations that you need to teach your leaders, is this whole bonus, I'm doing a personality science training in Springfield October 31st. So it'll be free for one person if you sign up for your organization. So people feel valued if you lead them to their personality. Emotional science. Let's dive into that. Have you guys followed the work of Amy Edmondson, Harvard researcher? She discovered that if you have emotionally safe teams where people feel free to speak candidly, to interact like, oh, we just had a mistake, and they're not being crushed for that. They're being, oh, wow, let me help you hold that emotional space for this difficult happening in our life, in our team's existence. She found that they'd be more effective, and that it becomes the #1 factor for team effectiveness. She's the discoverer of psychological safety, the term you probably have heard in emotional science realms, okay? And not only did she discover it, but Google didn't believe her, so they did their own study, okay? And they found that more important than clear goals, the dependability, the meaning or impact was psychological safety. If a leader can do emotional interactions and do emotional work with you well, you're going to be engaged with that leader. Things are going to work well, and that whole brain is going to be going. Instead of hiding or banishing emotions, I recommend following this bald guy. This is Dr. Stephen Hayes. He's got a radically different approach that's called ACT. It's been working in the workplace for 30 years, but not everybody knows about it. It's about, here's the myth that he debunks. You can't control your emotions. You can observe them. You can accept them. And then when you have this sort of detached relationship with them, and that's a healthy thing, and then you could pivot towards how you want to live, your values. Instead of being pushed around by emotionalism, you're sort of having this relationship that's respectful and saying, I'm feeling this. Yeah, and it makes me want to go do this, but I think I'll go this direction because that's what my values dictate. Instead of being pushed around by emotions, you end up not controlling them, but working with them. And here's Dr. Daniel Goleman. Again, he emphasizes that this whole emotional intelligence thing is a skill. You can create it with focus. And that's what we dive into when we really teach this to leaders. It's the #1 method for team success. For individual success, team success, now we're going to look at organizational success. Okay? Because people feel valued when you connect with them emotionally. The value science. Individual and corporate success. So there's some studies here that we'll see. It increases well-being, performance, satisfaction, and engagement. When we engage with values, it leads to better team performance. Okay? Here's the thing. Most organizations do this backwards. They sit around little tables and say, what are our values? Let's choose 3. That sound kind of market-y. No, values choose us. Values exist in the universe like gravity and the weak nuclear force. You don't get to choose gravity, it chooses you. The same with values. You need to understand how values work and interact in your workplace. Otherwise, if you choose 3 and put them on a wall, people are like, yeah? Okay? You need to understand, first of all, that there's 3 levels according to Viktor Frankl. There's creational values. How do I do my job well? It's important. How do I create that object well? How do I do the service well? But that's not enough. You need to know that that service or that object is creating an experience for a human being. Starbucks realized that we're not just doing a great cup of coffee, we're creating a home away from home, an experience for people. It's the whole experience that's valuable to somebody. But the really great companies are the ones that have this as their highest value. What we've been talking about, valuing people. They connect the little cup of coffee with the human being that comes through the door and say, that cup of coffee, that smile on your face, that politeness, is because there's a human being in front of you, and you're a human being. And what are you creating? Value. And what is more, I've divided up into these categories here. And you think, you've just cherry-picked 6 values. No, these are the 6 primary categories of values. These are what I call calming values. Without them, you can't do relationships. It starts with trust and it ends in peace. I can come into the workplace and feel calm. Then we can do work because I'm safe around you. And then we can go to this level. Usually this is where the workplace is. Wisdom, nobility, and joy. Nobility is sacrificial work. You try to do this without this, and people will disengage. People need to realize the interactional values between the values and how they work. And this was all discovered by Viktor Frankl here. And why is that important? In the concentration camp, everything of value, all those things that we just talked about, money, enjoyment, purpose, taken away. He's left with only values, and he realized that they are the thing that you can't take away from me, and I have an infinite amount to give. A huge realization. He said this, then I grasped the meaning of the greatest secret that human poetry and human thought and belief have to impart, that the salvation of man is through love, being valued, and in love. In the concentration camp, when there's nothing else left, that exists. And you can't take that away. In fact, you can create it. The Nazis couldn't crush it out of him. And those in the concentration camp, he noticed, they thrived, even in that darkness. I'll leave you with a couple of stories, real quick. At Cooper Medical Center, they could have just done their jobs. They had a man my age come in with a aneurysm in his brain. They gave him about 24 hours to live. His wife and his daughter broke into tears because she was to get married in 2 weeks. She said, all I wanted was for my dad to walk me down the aisle and give me away at my wedding. And so the ER staff broke into cooperation. Somebody found something off of a bottle and made it into a ring. Somebody found a cake in the fridge, and somebody found some flowers from another room. And like, who could we get to marry him? And then an EMT was actually an ordained minister. They played the music on one phone. They brought the sister in from the other, from California on the other phone. And they started to marry this couple because the fiance came in. And he was able to say, who gives this woman to this man? And the dying father was able to say, her mother and I do. And they created in that moment a sense of value that they weren't obliged to do. But do you think any of them will ever forget that moment? In their careers, this is probably one of the pinnacle things that they ever did, was to create a moment for a dying man of dignity and value. And that's what we're talking about. That's what it feels like. That's what you know in your heart. We want to create, and we need to generate the skills so that we can create this in our workplaces, because everyone deserves this. Everyone deserves to feel valued. You deserve to make other people feel valued. And other people, this is not just scientific. I give you a lot of geeky things and business things, but there's an art to it. People that are good at this, you're just drawn to because they do it naturally. And that's what we want this to actually look like. Megan realized this in the end, and Andre Agassi realized he was playing for others, and he started coming back in life, and he became a smiling, happy person because he was giving it away, not sucking it into himself. And Southwest Airlines tells a story about how a soldier was honored on the plane and how it changed their lives. That one act of being valued was their lifelong precious memory that they will forever remember. And that's what VP culture can generate for you and your people. And I'd be excited to share it with you guys more. So I hope you know what you would say now, and a rough sketch. If you were brought into that meeting, what's important about culture? Valuing people. It's the one thing that we need to build it around, and we need to build the skills to do it. So If you want to connect with me, that directions to that free class in Springfield are on here. So connect with me, and I would love to be able to connect you with resources, my newsletters, all that kind of stuff as well. So thanks very much for your time.